and it might help me to bring together some thoughts about why we think an Appalachian chief resided here. Way back during the pandemic, I did a series of virtual tours covering just about every aspect of the mission, but we ran out of pandemic before we got to the chief's house when everything opened. Okay, little bit of background. Now, San Luis was likely among the earliest missions established in the traditional homeland of the Appalachians between the Osceola and Ocklawahamie rivers. The Franciscans' mission effort into what would become Appalachia Province began in 1633, and the earliest incarnation of San Luis was probably near the Martin site, the De Soto site. In 1656, the Spaniards wanted to move San Luis 1 league, about 2.6 miles, to the west. They chose a high, flat-topped ridge where Seep Springs offered a permanent source of fresh water. When it was relocated, there was already a larger Spanish presence at San Luis than at typical missions, since beyond a Franciscan friar, there were actually two, the provincial deputy governor lived there, along with a garrison of around 10 Spanish soldiers. The chief of San Luis agreed to move his village to the new location and to build a stronghouse for the deputy and his garrison. In the 1670s, La Florida's governor in St. Augustine made a series of land grants in Appalachia Province that encouraged enterprising Spaniards to move into and around San Luis. A 1675 census listed 1,400 Appalachians associated with the mission, but a similar census of Spaniards has not been located. It was probably a considerable number. 9 Spanish-owned ranches in the province paid taxes in 1698 and 99. The number of Spanish soldiers garrisoned at that fort increased to about 45 toward the end. And in 1702, 89 arms-bearing Spaniards from throughout the province left for St. Augustine to assist during its siege by the English from Carolina. The Spaniards who moved into the province brought trouble with them. Extra labor demands, attempted monopolization of farm and ranch products, mistreatment by some Spaniards, and usurpation of Appalachian property were just some of the complaints of the Appalachians. In 1699, the chiefs of 2 missions, Avitachuco and San Luis, wrote to the King of Spain in hopes their grievances might be redressed. The chief of San Luis related that his people had moved away from the mission since Spaniards had seized their places. By 1704, after the English had failed to remove the Spaniards from St. Augustine, they decided to go after the Presidio's support system, the missions of Appalachia Province and western Timucua. After some disastrous defeats by the English and their Indian allies, most of the Appalachians decided that they would flee their homeland rather than assist the Spanish. The Spaniards burned San Luis, and the province was abandoned. Since the state of Florida purchased a portion of the site of San Luis in 1983, an incredible amount of excavation, analyses, and interpretation has been accomplished. Bonnie McEwen directed the great majority of this work, and she deserves most of the credit for the continued success of San Luis as an outdoor living history museum. Now, I'd like to turn to a structure excavated in 1992 and 1994 at the south edge of the mission's central plaza, just west of the council house. At a very early date, we began to refer to this building as the Chief's House, and I will admit that I was not comfortable with calling it by that name. Decades passed before all of the analysis for the structure was completed and entered, and now, looking at the sum total of the evidence, I think its function as a chief's residence is at least plausible. Now, in 1991, we were excavating a broad area west and southwest of the central plaza, looking for evidence of an Appalachian village. The original broad-scale survey in 1984 had recorded less imported pottery, but lots of native ceramics here. We located some interesting features and artifacts, but little evidence of structures. A backhoe digging a trench, for a water line down the former Messer driveway struck a pit feature. We moved to excavate the pit, except for the part that went west under the driveway, and defined it as feature 86. We decided to expand our excavation near the feature to the east and found a north-south line of post moles. Very interesting. We excavated a little larger region, both further east and to the south. Well, that line of posts running north to south turned out to be associated with a former fence along the Messer driveway. But other dark circular intrusions and concentrations of charcoal began to show up. Some of these were pretty clearly post moles, and they extended in a wide arc east of feature 86. Our units farthest south began to encounter interesting features too. Feature 87 was a charcoal and ash-filled hearth that was just south of the structure if you followed the curving line of post moles. It was originally mapped as being over 4 by 3 meters, but now it seems the core of this hearth was just a little over 2 meters in diameter. Feature 88 was located just east of Feature 87. Feature 88 was a small pit measuring 1.5 meters in diameter and was the only context here that contained preserved faunal remains. Feature 88 held cattle bones, along with a small assemblage of mission artifacts. I apologize for the blurriness of these pictures. They were taken at a small resolution. It's difficult to get it raised up. I know it can be done, but I don't know how to do it. Now, back in 1984, one of the early test excavation units had been a 2-meter square unit at 140 north, 399 east, and this unit had intersected 2 post moles. We placed a 4-meter square unit at 138 north, 401 east to see if the posts continued to the east. In this image, that's that 4-meter unit way off to the east. We found no post moles at all, but much of the unit was covered by sheet bin that was several levels deep. Now in this image, feature 86 is over here off the screen. You can't really see that curving line of post moles. Feature 88 fully excavated, and we're about to begin working on feature 87. The curving line of dark intrusions and charcoal concentrations turned out to be a number of post moles with corncob-filled smudge pits just interior of them. The estimated circumference of the line of post moles was over 20 meters in diameter, and it came pretty close to those 2 post moles recorded in that 1984 test unit. So this was a very large structure. In 1994, we conducted further excavations on the building. We located the north and eastern sides, again represented by post moles with smudge pits just inside the posts. 7 larger intrusions were excavated, and 5 of these turned out to be support posts inside the structure. A central hearth, feature 90, was identified, with its center point about 1 meter northwest of the true center of the building. Now this upper left, there's the central hearth right up here. This structure also held evidence of a clay floor. Only at its north edge, abutting the Mission Plaza, was the clay floor burned solid by the fire that destroyed the building. Other patches of clay floor were scorched, but not solidly fired, and these were mostly north of the central hearth. Now, amazingly, this portion of the site east of the Messer driveway had never been plowed. There was very little disturbance of any sort over the structure. The post molds of the outer wall averaged 22 centimeters in diameter. They initiated at 35 centimeters below surface on average, and their bases averaged 67 centimeters below surface. The spacing between post molds varied from just under a meter to just over 2 meters apart, but 1.2 to 1.5 meters apart was most common. 11 profiled posts had flat bases, suggesting metal tools were used to prepare them, while 22 others exhibited rounded bases. The cob-filled smudge pits averaged a little smaller, 20 centimeters in diameter. Their initiation depth averaged 29 centimeters below surface, while their bases averaged 63 centimeters below surface, little shallower than the post molds. Now, there were 7 intrusions that we thought might be larger support posts. 2 of these were probably either, or one was a definite tree mold and one is a possible tree mold. The remaining 5 supports that braced the roof had base depths that ranged from 86 to 94 centimeters below surface. This 8 centimeter difference is a fairly tight grouping of basal depth for the support posts. There may have been additional supports in areas left unexcavated because of trees, but this building, native in design, was also held together with wrought hardware. 30 intact wrought nails and 5 spikes were located inside the walls, along with 39 fragments of nails and spikes. It's a pretty good amount of hardware. Not one secular Spanish residence yielded more examples of nails and spikes from their interior contexts. Granted, the Spanish residences were smaller than this 20 meter diameter structure. We had discovered a circular building, native in design, of about 20 meters diameter on the south edge of the central plaza, 30 meters west of the council house. This structure did not have the mathematical regularity of the council house. It's been published as being 20.5 meters or 19 meters in diameter, and either fits pretty well depending on which posts you connect. I prefer to call it about 20 meters in diameter, which is about 65 feet. And this is much larger than typical Appalachian houses, which range from 5 to 7 meters in diameter. One structure at San Luis that I believe was a typical Appalachian house was 6.5 meters in diameter. There was another big difference between this structure and other Appalachian buildings at San Luis. The council house and 2 typical Appalachian residences displayed a row of post molds lining the interior of their outer walls, evidence of benches against the walls. A Cuban bishop visited the Mission provinces in the 1670s, including a stay at San Luis. Bishop Calderon related that generally the Christianized Indians slept on the ground or on a frame covered with skins in their round straw huts. There was little evidence of a regular row of bench supports lining the wall in this structure. It doesn't seem that this structure was located here for the life of the mission. The council house and church, for instance, were probably the earliest constructions on the plaza and remained in the same places until 1704. Both of these structures exhibited strong evidence of repair, and a lot of it. Wooden posts deteriorated and were replaced. Additional posts were added to both buildings, both the church and the council house. There was not very much evidence for post replacement in this structure at the south edge of the plaza. In its northeastern portion, there were posts very close together, sort of a double post arrangement, this area right here. Now, this is probably evidence of repair. We saw many more of the double posts in the council house, but overall, evidence of repair is limited. We took flotation samples for ethnobotanical analyses. The outdoor hearth, feature 87, the central hearth, feature 90, all of the smudge pits were entirely floated, and we took other samples from the floor deposits. Features 86, 87, and 88 held corn, common bean, provisionally identified cowpea or black-eyed pea, persimmon, grape, plum, hickory nutshell, and acorns. The smudge pits held corn, of course, along with wheat grains, positively identified cowpea, black-eyed pea, cabbage palm, hickory nutshell, and acorns. Now, the wheat and the cowpea are European cultigens. Peaches are another common European cultigen, and while peach pit fragments weren't recovered from the flotation samples, they were identified from features and general excavation levels. Faunal remains were mostly small burned bone fragments from the features or floor deposits. Feature 88 was the only context that had fair bone preservation, and this small pit held cattle bones. Now, no chicken bones were identified from this structure, but there was evidence of domesticated fowl. It's a long story, but we recognize gastroliths. In this case, in the case of this structure, fragments of stone and glass that exhibit polish and rounded edges as probable evidence of chickens. These examples are from a different context, but it's a good picture, so I used it. There were 60 gastroliths recognized from this excavation, and 19 of them were from interior contexts, including 6 from the central hearth. Feature 86 held 30 gastroliths, and feature 87 yielded 3 more. The rest were from units west and south of the building. The numbers of artifacts from this structure suggest a private rather than a public function. The council house was a public building, and it was swept and maintained. The dearth of artifacts from the council house was a striking feature. Overall, the council house produced about 24 counted sherds per square meter of excavation, and this building produced just over 43 sherds per square meter. I also compared 4-meter units just north of the central hearths of both the council house and this structure. Now, the 4-meter unit north of the council house hearth was likely part of a cleared dance ground, and it held 125 counted potsherds. The 4-meter unit north of the central hearth of this building to the west yielded 608 counted sherds. Over 21,000 mission period potsherds were recovered from the overall excavation of this structure. From the interior contexts of the building, about 11,500 Aboriginal pottery fragments and just over 450 sherds of imported Spanish ceramics were tabulated. The associated features and the Eastern midden accounted for many more, and nearly 7,000 sherds were located in the outlying units. The structure's interior contexts were dominated by traditional native ceramics, about 95% of the pottery, and most were tempered with grog or crushed potsherds. Like everywhere else at San Luis, plain undecorated pottery was most numerous. There was also the usual complement of both stamped and incised ceramics. One ceramic type from in and around the building, it's this one right here, looks like a piece of brimmed cloneware, but it's not. It's an Aboriginal vessel form. From around the building was from in and around the building was a brimmed bowl vessel form with incision on the interior of the brim. It's a little unusual since none of this type was identified from the council house, and it's more common in Spanish contexts. There was also a surprising amount of colonialware inside the building. Colonialware, native-made pottery in European vessel forms. Okay, there were typical colonialware vessel forms footed base down here at the bottom, strap handle, pitcher spout. We don't find too many of them, but we do find them. And red filmed sherds on the right. But there were also unusual or rarer colonial-ware forms. This one up here is the cup of a colonial-ware candle holder, the cup where you would put the candle into. And a skillet. And it's represented by this sherd right here. Doesn't look much like a skillet, does it? The skillet form was represented by a straight finished handle. We had no clue what it was in 1992, but another had been recovered from feature 73 in the Spanish village the previous year and called colonial-ware since it didn't fit any native vessel form. In 2006, we recovered restorable examples of the form from trash pits associated with the Spanish house on the north side of the plaza and realized that we had recovered these things from a few Spanish village trash pits and from the floor of the building at the south edge of the plaza. Okay, I didn't have a good picture of tobacco pipes. Thing about a tobacco pipe, if it's a native made one, unless it's a big sherd, it doesn't look like much. So I'm just going to talk about them. We identified 7 fragments of native made tobacco pipes from these smoking pipes, from these excavations, but no examples of the kaolin European style pipes. 3 of the Appalachia-made pipe fragments were located on the western interior of the structure, and another was identified from the eastern midden, area 81, over to the east. And the remaining 3 were located west and south of the building. Now, interestingly, the council house also yielded 7 smoking pipe fragments, but of those 7, 6 were those white kaolin stem fragments of European pipes. Now, clay balls were more numerous here than in any other excavation at San Luis. There were 15 clay ball fragments inside the building, 23 from associated features, and 6 from the outer units. The clay ball and pipe fragments underscore the overall Appalachia character of the artifacts. The clay balls were mostly undecorated, but several had complicated stamped surfaces of both curvilinear and rectilinear motifs. They may have been used in cooking as a clay counterpart to boiling stones. There were small numbers of non-local native ceramics. There were 2 sherds of cord-marked pottery tempered with grit. Prairie cord-marked is an earlier Alachua and Suwannee Valley tradition pottery type. It's more common well east and southeast of San Luis. A little of it is present in some of the Timucuan missions east of Appalachia Province. Now, this type has a very restricted distribution at San Luis. In total, we've identified only 19 sherds of this type. Besides this structure that I'm talking about, the other examples have come from a midden deposit associated with the council house, from that Spanish house across the plaza, and surprisingly from a few contexts just outside the church. Plain, undecorated sherds tempered with shell numbered 26 and all originated in Area 81, the midden east of the structure. The shell-tempered pottery probably originated north of Appalachia Province. The Appalachicolas lived along the lower Chattahoochee River for much of the mission period. Some of their ceramics were commonly shell-tempered, and there was an enormous amount of trade between the Spaniards, the Appalachians, and the Appalachicolas during the entire time San Luis was in its second location. Most excavations at San Luis have yielded small numbers of shell-tempered ceramics. This building is one of 3 contexts that yielded the highest numbers, alongside the fort and that Spanish residence across the plaza. The presence of non-local pottery from areas within the Spanish sphere of influence is thought to be a byproduct of outside trade contacts. And this might indicate a special status for the occupant of this structure. Imported pottery included majolica, olive jar, and porcelain. The types of identified majolica were Puebla polychrome, Fig Springs polychrome, Osceola polychrome, and San Luis blue on white. This larger fragment of Fig Springs was found in the Central Hearth, feature 90. So some of it is quite burned and some of it is not. The later post-1680 types, such as Castillo polychrome or San Agustin blue and white, were not present inside or outside the building. And I'll admit this still bugs me. I will add, however, that not one fragment of post-1680 majolica was identified from the extensive excavations on the west side of the plaza, which included 2 large trash pits and one later cooking feature. Now, there was a little Asian porcelain associated with this structure, little Asian blue and white porcelain sherd down there at the bottom. The blue and white porcelain was recovered inside the building, while a tiny fragment of plain white porcelain was found just beyond, outside the west wall. Okay, olive jar represented the largest part of the imported ceramics in the structure. There were 341 sherds of olive jar inside the wall line, 21 others from the associated features in midden, and 31 examples from the outer units. Now, there were only 50 fragments of olive jar recovered from inside the council house, so this building yielded over 6.5 times as many olive jar sherds. And that still works out even if you think about this building was nearly completely excavated. Council house was only about 45% excavated. Well, it's an interesting finding. The Spaniards generally used olive jars for storage and transport. If the Appalachians also used them for similar purposes, and that's a big if, then their concentration in this structure could be related to tribute. Appalachians under the jurisdiction of San Luis were expected to offer tribute to their chief, like a portion of the corn and other goods produced by them. It is possible that some tribute was stored in olive jars. Now, the combined percentage of imported pottery and colonial-wares was 4.9% of the overall ceramic assemblage from inside the building. Now, this is about half the percentage of the same categories in 2 of the Spanish homes from their interior, 2 of the Spanish homes on the central plaza from their interiors. Those are, they were both just on the other side of 10%, 10.3, 10.6. This suggests to me, at least, that the occupant of this home was highly acculturated into Hispanic lifeways. We recovered only 2 bells associated with the building, but both of them are pretty neat. One was the lower half of a copper alloy flush loop bell, think jingle bell. It was recovered from the base of Area 81, the eastern midden associated with the structure. Now, these types of little bells are fairly common at San Luis, and the greatest concentration of them is from the council house. Down here, here's the one from the chief's house, concentration in the council house. Rarely, these bells exhibit a maker's mark, and this one bears a mark we had seen once before. During the early broad-scale testing phase, one of the 2-meter test units was placed in what would later be identified as the council house. The first 14 centimeters of excavation yielded 3 sheet metal flush loop bells, and one of them bore an identical mark. Now, the other bell associated with this building came from feature 86, and it's the upper portion of a larger cast bell. down here at the bottom. Think sleigh bell for this one. If complete, it would measure 4 centimeters in diameter. Larger bells like these were sometimes used to ornament harness and tack. In fact, the only other context that has yielded similar cast bells is the fort. There's the military complex up here. Where other positive evidence of horse tack is rare but present, the military complex. Feature 73 over there on the east, over here, produced one other that might be a cast rumbler bell fragment, but its identification is tentative. Now, horses, let's see. No, I'm going to go back. Horses were one of the items of trade with the Apalachicolas, and the Spaniards' restriction of that trade late in the 17th century was one cause of trouble between the Appalachians and the Apalachicolas. In 1693, an expedition to Pensacola Bay set off from San Luis with 76 horses, most of them collected from Appalachia province. During a 1694 visitation, an Indian complained that the chief of Mission San Damian owed him for 3 horses he had given the chief on credit. The chief returned 2 horses and paid up for the other one. A document from the early 18th century requests 25 horses from the chiefs of Appalachia province for St. Augustine. So, is that cast bell evidence of horse tack associated with this structure? Well, the answer is a resounding, maybe, maybe not. But it could be. We recovered 2 examples, one intact and one a fragment of jet rosary beads from inside the building. These beads are cubic and pyramidal with multiple perforations at right angles. They're intended to separate strands of beads in the Catholic rosary. We've identified jet rosary beads from various contexts, from trash pits of the Spanish village to outside the friary and in the church. These 2 are the only examples recovered from inside any residential structure. I think this is an important indication of the religion embraced by the occupants of this residence. Other types of adornment items were abundant. A faceted crystal quartz bead came from inside the building. 3 near identical faceted quartz pendants were in feature 86 to the west, and another faceted quartz pendant, this one flattened or lozenge shaped, was located in area 81, the midden deposit east of the building. The unusual flattened pendant form is unique to this structure thus far. In earlier times, some southeastern Indians used quartz crystals for divination or as amulets. Spaniards also believed that items of crystal quartz protected the wearer from the evil eye. Crystal quartz beads and pendants are not exceedingly rare at San Luis, but they are usually recovered as 1 or 2 objects from trash pits or other contexts. No residential context at San Luis has produced more than the 5 associated with this building. The military complex held 6 examples between the blockhouse and moat contexts, while the church contained 29 examples of quartz beads or pendants. The multiple quartz items associated with this house might indicate the dual religious and political power of the occupant. Now, only a single glass pendant was recognized from the entire excavation, and it originated from post hole 3 inside the building. It's a unique form for San Luis, at least so far, and is of opaline glass. It's also unusual in that its apex is ground with 2 facets and its suspension hole is biconically drilled. Only one other opaline glass pendant has been recovered from San Luis, again so far. Now, this second example is of a different fluted form and was identified from inside the Daub house on the other side of the plaza. It is somewhat patinated, but the opalescent appearance is most pronounced in the break at the top of it. Glass beads, or bead fragments, totaled 143 for all of the excavations here. Feature 90, the central hearth, held 2 composite gooseberry beads, the only context where this bead type was recognized, along with 13 other simple beads. For all the glass beads, 80 originated interior of the structure, and a further 53 were located in its associated features or midden, leaving 10 glass beads from outlying units. Just under 70% of the beads were small seed beads recovered from various fine-screened samples. The majority of the recovered beads were simple drawn beads, and various shapes of blue were the most common colors. Some of the drawn beads were more elaborate. Cornaline d'Aleppo seed beads were found in interior contexts and feature 87. 2 striped Ichtutney inlaid black beads were identified inside the walls, and another originated in the excavation level above feature 87. This is the Ichtutney inlaid black. This is actually another very dark blue bead with a white stripe. 3 wound beads were recognized, and all were from inside the structure. One was a larger burgundy bead with 5 facets at one end and 4 at the other. It might be this one down here at the bottom. And another was a fragment of a faceted burgundy bead. Now, the third wound bead was also a fragment broken in half. It's a very dark, opaque, essentially black bead with 2 wavy threads of white glass around each end. An empty, sinuous channel surrounds the middle of the bead, but a few other examples hold traces of white glass in the mostly empty channels. Now, this bead type has been recovered from late contexts at San Luis. The friary held half a dozen of them, and some were partially melted, perhaps from the 1704 raising of the friary. The late 1690s blockhouse contained 7 beads or bead fragments of the same kind. In the friary and blockhouse, the beads' wavy stripes around the perforations vary between greenish and white. Another identical example, was identified from feature 174, associated with that very late building at the north edge of the plaza. Glass bottle fragments were represented with more shards inside than outside the building. A few fragments of square-sectioned, I think there were 5, a few fragments of square-sectioned case bottles, olive green in color, were recognized from the structure's interior, including its central hearth. 2 rolled copper alloy tinklers were identified from adjoining units on the north end of the structure. These rolled cones have an opening at their apex to accommodate a cord that might attach them to clothing to serve as noise makers. I think it's also possible that they could have served as earrings. Weaponry-related artifacts were well represented, and the majority of them were Appalachian in character. There were 29 projectile points or point fragments in total, and 26 of those were from the structure's interior. Feature 86 and that eastern midden each held 1, and 1 point was located outside the walls. All that were identified to type were small arrow points, either Ichtutney points or Pinellas points or fragments of them. 1 arrow point was chipped from green bottle glass right there at the top, showing how Appalachians took a European object, a shard of a broken bottle, and modified it to fit their purposes. Along with the examples of traditional weaponry, there was abundant evidence of European-derived weapons. The lock and mechanism of a flintlock musket was found just outside the south wall near feature 87. James Levy examined the lock and saw evidence of a poor attempt at repair that probably prevented this lock from working. It is of English manufacture, probably dating from the late 17th or early 18th centuries. Now, this occupant must have had another working flintlock musket. There were 5 total gun flints identified, and all exhibited the pillow shape of native manufactured gun flints. 3 were inside the building, and another came from the midden on the east. 9 examples of lead shot were recovered, all from the building or its associated features. 7 were from inside the structure, and feature 86 and the eastern midden both held 1. The shot that could be reliably measured ranged from 7 millimeters to 15 millimeters in diameter. 3 of them were the 15 millimeter size, almost about 60 caliber in modern terms. Smaller lead pellet shot was also identified. While 14 lead pellets were recognized from fine-screened interior contexts, including the central hearth, the majority of the smaller shot came from outside the building. There were 52 screened from the outer contexts, and almost all of that was from associated features in midden. Feature 87, that outdoor hearth, yielded the highest number with 42 small lead pellets. The copper alloy tip or end of a scabbard for a bladed weapon was identified from the western interior of the structure. Only 2 scabbard ends have been recognized at San Luis, and the other is an iron scabbard tip from the fort's blockhouse. Amy Bushnell has written that native chiefs were entitled to carry swords gifted to them by the Spaniards. So what didn't we find? We didn't recover any artifacts related to sewing or clothing. Now, I wouldn't expect to find things like thimbles or scissors, but it is surprising to me that no aglets, buttons, or buckles were identified. These types of artifacts are present, if not abundant, in the Spanish village and the blockhouse out at the fort. Given the documentary evidence of the importance of cloth and clothing to the Appalachians, I would expect to see a button or a buckle in the chief's house. I will add that no buckles or buttons were recovered from the council house either. So we located an exceptionally large native structure, 30 meters west of the council house, at the south edge of the Mission Plaza. Its size, its location on the plaza near the council house, and its diverse artifact assemblages might suggest that an elite Appalachee resided here. The chief's duties included meeting with other leaders in the council house and attending formal and informal gatherings there. This building was held together with wrought hardware and revealed little evidence of repair, as one might expect had the building been used for the life of the mission. The faunal remains included domesticated mammals, those cattle bones in feature 88, and there was indirect evidence for the consumption of chickens, the polished gastroliths throughout the excavations. The ethnobotanical remains included all the usual indigenous plant foods, along with European cultigens, wheat and black-eyed peas. A few artifacts from in and around the structure suggest it was occupied toward the end of the mission. The colonial-ware skillet is a vessel form that has only been recovered from post-1680 contexts at San Luis. The unusual wound glass bead, likewise, has been recognized from the latest contexts. Another item that might indicate a late date for the building is the flintlock lock plate. Recovered just beyond the south wall, it appears to date right to the end of the mission. There also seems to be some connections or similarities to that Spanish house across the plaza. We think that the Dobbs Spanish house near the north edge of the plaza may have belonged to one of the last deputy governors, based on its rich artifact assemblages, including very late Majolicas. The Dobb house or its associated features yielded examples of the colonial-ware skillet form, and one of the late wound beads. The residence north of the plaza produced one of the two opaline glass pendants recognized at San Luis. The Spanish house was one of the few places that held concentrations of shell-tempered ceramics, along with the fort and that native structure on the plaza's south edge. The two buildings, north and south, both held small numbers of non-local cord-marked pottery. Once the council house, the other building that I'm talking about will be, you'll see it right here. Once the council house and church had been identified on opposite sides of the town plaza, and this happened very early on, their locations were believed to symbolize a remarkable degree of accommodation and interdependence between the Spanish, great Marie, my big finish. Okay, so the church and the council house was believed to reveal a tremendous amount of accommodation and interdependence between the Spanish and the Appalachians from the earliest years of the mission's relocation. With the arrival of the new Spanish colonists after the 1670s, the mission began to change from an Appalachee to a Spanish community. By the mid-1690s, that transformation was complete, and San Luis was described as having the appearance of a Spanish city. It appears that the two houses, south and north of the plaza, reflect similar interdependence between the settlement's civic leadership, both Appalachian and Spanish, near the end of the mission. Spanish administrators retained the tradition of working with and through Appalachian leaders. The Appalachian chief reinforced his own authority by his association with Spanish leadership. He remained in the mission center and continued to fulfill his role even after most of his vassals had moved to outlying areas. So what happened with that list of grievances sent by the chiefs of Avitachuco and San Luis to the Spanish crown in 1699? Over the next year, there were letters from the king to the governor in St. Augustine and from him to the deputy governor at San Luis, demanding an investigation and restitution for any injuries the Appalachee had received. Little or nothing ever came from this. In 1701, an Appalachian woman said that her people were on the verge of open revolt. According to her, only the chief of Avitachuco restrained the Appalachians from attacking the Spaniards. When Appalachia province was finally abandoned in 1704, the chief of Avitachuco and his people went east with the retreating Spaniards, while San Luis's chief traveled west with his people away from St. Augustine. The end. Thank you for your time and attention. Anybody has a question, I'll either answer it or not. Yes.
All right, you go first. On the drawing up there, you have a whole number of posts side by side. Is that what you're talking about being representative of replacement, repair?
No, if you look close, most of these posts that are side by side are red. So smudge pit, smudge pit,
Okay.
smudge pit, smudge
Okay.
pit, smudge pit, smudge pit, smudge pit, smudge pit, smudge pit. The few places where there were these double posts that might be evidence of repair, particularly up here in this, these two, they were practically side by side, and we'd seen it in the council house before, where instead of putting a new post in, just put one next to it. It's difficult to see the red of the smudge pits, but they were lining just inside the post, and normally you'll have the outer wall, smudge pits, and then another row of posts that represents the benches. We just didn't see that in this excavation, and that's a serious question. I wonder why.
I'm interested in the lead shot and the gun flints and
Mhm.
the other stuff. Everything that I've read about the period indicated the Spanish were very reluctant to arm the Appalachee.
Yeah,
So what's your
started out that way for sure. A good way to think of it is look at two lists. I think it's 1677. A group of Appalachians head west to attack the Chiska. They're going to give them what for? And it tells you how many Appalachians were carrying bows and arrows and how many were carrying firearms. There are more, I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but there were more archers than there were musketeers. In 1704, when the Appalachee joined the Spanish to go out to try to throw the English out of Patali, I think it is, they also list how many Appalachians are carrying bows and arrows and how many are carrying guns. There are more musketeers than there are archers. And it seems like as time went on, guns became so common that anybody who wanted a gun could get one. The English were, supplying so many guns that you could trade and get a weapon. I think it eventually came to a point where the Spaniards really, they couldn't keep them out of their hands. That was something at the beginning, but it couldn't last.
Do you think they were mostly obtained from the English?
Mostly, well, some we know were from the French too. There were all kinds of guns. And Spanish guns are floating around. We've got a few, I can think of two parts of Spanish style flintlocks that maybe those were soldiers, Spanish soldiers. Maybe those weren't Appalachia from the fort. But towards the end, guns are really common.
The flints, I've seen like pictures of flint, yes, there was a French flint or Spanish or what do you got here?
Yeah.
In the way of flints? All Spanish or?
Well, I'll tell you what, I couldn't tell you a Spanish gun flint from any other gun flint. I'm just not familiar with that. But I will tell you, looking at gun flints, there's this sort of old way of thinking. It's mostly true, but not always. The lighter honey-colored flints are French, and the very dark gray, almost black flints, those are English. And in 170, it may have been 1704, but it was right at the end. Things are getting bad in Appalachia province, and one of the captains is sent to Mobile. It had to be 1702 because Mobile wasn't founded until that year. So he's going there to get soldiers to bring back to San Luis to fight against the English that are causing problems. At this time, Spain and France were nominally allies. And they won't give him soldiers, but they give him a number of guns, a lot of powder, and a lot of gun flints. And we do see some of these honey-colored gun flints at the blockhouse that we think, yeah, maybe those are French flints. I couldn't tell you what a Spanish flint looks like. You can tell the European style gun flint the way it was made from a native manufactured gun flint. They have a really different appearance.
In the later, with the plate fleets, the Spanish were making virtually nothing themselves. They were buying everything or making it in the New World.
That's true. Spain didn't send a bunch of gun flints to San Luis in 1702. They go check with the French. Maybe they have something.
Clay balls that were in this structure, you remember? Offhand?
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention that Dan Penton mentioned that those things were probably actually used in steam baths,
I have heard this before.
Because they're less likely to explode when you put water on them than rocks would.
I have heard this. And I argued with someone that the Spaniards never said a peep about that sort of thing. And the comeback was, oh, they would never let the Spaniards be aware of this. They would never let them know. This is a secret ritual.
Several concubines and having steam baths all the time.
Okay. So there were 15 fragments inside the walls. There were 23 from associated features, and most of those came from feature 86 over on the west. But I do know some came from this midden area as well. So these three places, yeah, I think so. This area of the floor had of the building had a prepared clay floor, and this part got hot enough to burn solid. That clay floor actually extended into this area too, but it went from like there wasn't enough clay in it to make it a solid face. There was it ranged from a good bit of clay mixed with some brown sand and faded into some brown sand mixed with clay, and just went away. So I think feature 86 might have been a clay mine for the clay that was used in that floor. Best I got. Cassie, don't you have a question for me, dear? Okay, good. That's good. That's good enough.
Okay.
Thank you for your time and attention.
I just want to say that this poor guy has been displaced from his building as he helps. He knows we had to move everything out of his building, and he's forced to share his building with us. And every other week we move the photo set up, and you took some amazing photos. You were
Yeah.
busy taking photos last week, and you
I
really
only
did a great
wish I
job.
had taken better photos in 1991.
Well, you took
too.
fabulous
And they're
photos.
okay, but they're at such a low resolution. Without Jan Wiley, I
Well,
can't
no,
get them blown up.
Well, okay, but the new photos you took are fabulous. So I might be asking you to help me with photos.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was great, and
No, thank you, Mary.
and to have been there to learn about the gastroliths, that was the
It's a long
coolest
story. I could have gone
thing.
on.
I know he gave a whole talk about the gastroliths, but that is so cool. And the bone preservation is so bad there because of the acidic soil.
That's right.
So as Jerry had mentioned, that he had very little evidence of chickens except for those gastroliths. And of course they were eating chickens because through the historic records that they were raising
The documents tell you they were.
chickens. Yeah. So just fascinating stuff. Really great presentation. Thank you so much, Jerry.
Yeah.
And as a token of our theme,
Why, thank you so much. Oh, thank
for
you. Thank you. Next time I do this, I'll wear it.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you,
Jerry.
everybody. I thank you for your time, your attention.
Hello from Zoom. Thank you so much. Enjoyed it.
Barbara Barnett says, thank you so much. Enjoyed it. And Roman, I am so incredibly sorry. I could not be waiting very while I was doing this slide. But this has been recorded, and I will send you the link so you can watch that. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Bye.